Welcome to Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. What if you could learn from experienced real estate investors, find out what got them to where they are now, get insight into their daily habits, and take these insights to inspire your own growth? Each week, Jonathan Green shares an in-depth look at the mindful approach to real estate investing. Jonathan is a lifelong real estate investor, advisor, and coach, as well as the founder and team leader of Streamlined Properties. Whether you're looking to start from scratch, get to the next level, or just for a straightforward and honest approach to real estate investing, Jonathan seeks to provide a free mentorship program you can take with you anywhere. Now, here's Jonathan.
Get ready for another episode of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. Now, we have talked about fractional real estate investing, but it was in a different context. This week, we're going to talk about fractional real estate investing as a group through a real estate investing club. This is a way to bypass syndications. It's really interesting, and my guest is Brian Davis of Spark Rental. He's going to go through his journey, where he made mistakes, and how he came up with this with a partner to go into this fractional real estate investing. I think you're going to find it really interesting. Let's go. This is episode 159 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Brian Davis. Brian is the co-founder of Spark Rental. And at Spark Rental, this is a group investing club. They focus on fractional real estate investing. And this was built after Brian's own experience in investing. Brian, welcome to the show.
Jonathan, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, appreciate it. I was, of course, on your podcast. We did 3 spots there, and I'm glad to get you over here.
Oh, well, we had such a fun conversation at ours. I'm pumped to be here and have a chat with you and your audience.
Yeah, me too. Well, so Brian, when do you remember the first time yourself being interested in real estate?
Oh, man, I fell into real estate by accident.
It happens.
Yeah,
like a puddle.
I graduated college in 2003, which, of course, I'm dating myself here. But I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. Zero idea. And I just started asking around among my parents' friends, like, hey, can I just come chat with you on a random Tuesday morning and see what it is that you actually do? Because you grow up and like 5 career jobs, right? Like 5 hours,
right.
like firefighter, astronaut, and you just don't know what normal people in the private sector do. So anyway, I fell into a job working for a hard money lender, actually. Or technically, it was 2 guys who ran a nationwide subprime mortgage lending company, which in 2003 was cool, right? That was before they got vilified. But on the side of this nationwide lending company that they lent their own private money as hard money loans. So at the end of a summer internship, the guys basically said, hey, we don't need another loan officer doing 30-year fixed mortgages for Joe Schmo homeowner. What we need is someone to do hard money loans for us. And I said, sure. I don't have anything else going on. But, of course, in the process of working with investors for hard money loans, I got introduced to the world of real estate investing. And I'm watching all these guys make money hand over fist in the mid-aughts. And, of course,
they were killing it.
Of course, I'm like, I can do this too. So I went out, overspent on a ton of rental properties. And 2008 hit me like a ton of bricks, of course. The rest is history. But I fell in love with real estate and the notion of passive income from real estate, building a whole side business around real estate investing. That was my first introduction to all of that. And despite how hard of a landing I had in 2008, been in the industry ever since.
Yeah, that's an interesting background, because most people build up a bunch of reserves, get into hard money lending as like, hey, this is a great way to make extra money. You kind of went the opposite way. Most people don't learn from that. And what did you see about the investors other than them like just crushing it on flips before 2008 that was attractive just on the real estate end?
Well, so this is before the FIRE movement. But, watching these guys, some of these investors would keep as a rental, 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 of the properties that they flipped. They were doing the BRRRR deal, or the BRRRR strategy rather. And again, this is before I even had heard that acronym. I'm not even sure that acronym had been coined in 2005.
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah.
But, that was what they were doing. They were keeping they were basically flipping properties to themselves to refinance, keep as long-term rental properties. And the whole notion being that you have enough of those properties all generating passive income for you, and you no longer have to work. You can cover your living expenses. And again, I didn't know the term financial independence at the time. This was before the FIRE movement, but the concept was still there, right? I mean, people were retiring early long before the FIRE movement and Mr. Money Mustache. So that notion of freedom really appealed to me. I've always had a strong independent streak. So the idea of not having to depend on a boss or a job, clocking in every morning, having an alarm clock, the idea of being able to sustain yourself indefinitely with income from your investments always appealed to me, even when I was in my 20s.
Yeah. So when you started, you said before that you overpaid for a bunch of rental properties, and then, 2008 happened to a lot of us. But what mistakes did you make when you first started buying that you think could help investors in this market?
Yeah, well, it's so embarrassing to say. When I first started buying rental properties, I didn't even know how to calculate cash flow, how to forecast cash flow on a single family rental property. I mean, I was sitting there still thinking that it was the rent minus the mortgage, which
right, that's it. It's easy.
I mean, in retrospect, it's truly embarrassing to say. But one of the rules of thumb that we talk about sometimes on our blog or on our podcast, just to help new investors wrap their heads around this concept, is the 50% rule, that roughly half of the rent every month of a single family rental property will go to non-mortgage expenses. And those do include property taxes and property insurance, which get rolled into the mortgage. But but by non-mortgage expenses, I mean everything other than principal and interest on a loan. And when people first hear that, when novice income investors first hear that, their initial reaction is, well, how could I ever find a property that's going to cash flow?
Right.
And my point is that is exactly the lesson you should be taking away from that. It's really hard to find properties that cash flow well. And professional investors, they're out there doing mass mail campaigns, direct mail and, SMS marketing campaigns and email campaigns. They're hitting up, pre-foreclosures and people in divorce and, probate sales and all that stuff. They have an entire business system in place to find off-market deals, because those are really the ones that are going to cash flow for you. It's really hard to go out on the MLS and find a property that's actually going to cash flow for you well, because you're competing with every other investor in the world for those properties. And
non-investors who are just like dipping their toe in, who end up overpaying.
Exactly.
Like you in the beginning, though, like even though my dad trained me, still I was like, get excited, like it's exciting. Like, yeah, sure, I'll get that. I don't want to haggle. And then all of a sudden you're like, wow, that doesn't make as much money as I thought. One thing that I think is really interesting, though, because it's nice for people to know that you can make some mistakes early on, learn from them, grow through them. But one thing that you clearly had the ability to do is take action. What do you think was it about the way that you were brought up or what you learned that you were just like gung-ho, like, I'm going to buy into a couple mistakes. Let's see what happens. Some people sit on the sideline for years just terrified.
Yeah, the whole analysis paralysis. Yeah. Well, so one thing that was a quirk of my career path. So in 2008, not only did all my investments totally crash and burn, but I also lost my day job, basically, because no one's borrowing hard money loans anymore.
Yeah.
So I was being paid solely on commissions at that point. So all of my income, all of my day job income, if you will, dried up right at the same time as all my investments crashed and burned. So I had to go out and start a totally new career path at that time. So I started working for a company. It was an online business that was selling legal forms and other services for mom and pop landlords. And the only reason I got that job is because I was a mom and pop landlord myself.
Yeah.
So, I still stayed in the industry, even though I wasn't doing hard money loans anymore, but I was still working with real estate investors, with landlords. So I never left the industry completely. So I maintained my connection to it. I maintained my interest in it. I started writing blog articles about, real estate investing and rental investing and building passive income from real estate and all that stuff. So that did help keep me in it. And so that was sort of a practical reason. But the mindset reason is that I realized that I could either look at all those mistakes that I made as just losses and walk away, which a lot of people do when they take losses on a certain type of investment. Or I could look at it as tuition and the cost of education and just not make those mistakes again, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in my hubris of youth, in my arrogance, being a young investor who just thought I could learn it all on the fly and go it alone and not get a mentor, not get a coach, not get a senior partner. Yeah, I made every mistake in the book, but that meant that I didn't have to make those mistakes again. I could learn from those mistakes, and it's the cost of tuition. So I was able to go back and keep investing and do better next time with my returns, lowering the risk, raising the returns. And I would like to think that I've come a long way in that regard, but but I'm not retired yet. So still in the stadium, still in the game.
Yeah, but that's a strong point of view, because there's a lot of people who will go out, as a brand new investor, spend 50 grand on some coaching program that they didn't vet, say it doesn't work because they really had nothing to be ready for it. Whereas you can take lumps, lose 50 grand on a couple investments, and then just say like, oh, that's it. Your mindset shift is really good for people who maybe take a bath on one or tried to flip too early, and saying like, hey, that's my real estate course. Now let me go back and examine everything that I did wrong, write it down, make sure that I have kind of my own little notebook of what not to do the next time.
Yeah, I mean, they say you can either learn in the classroom or learn on the streets, right? Learning in the classroom is usually cheaper and easier to you, especially to your ego. But those lessons, you don't have a choice but to learn those lessons when you learn them on the street. I mean, those lessons will hit you over the head until you learn them. Yeah. So, as much as we try to encourage people to learn in the classroom and not on the streets, when you do learn on the streets, you learn the lessons the first time.
Yeah, right. You don't want to do it again. So those first properties, those were all single family rentals?
They were mostly single family rentals. I did a couple flips. There was one small multifamily, but in general, it was mostly single family rental, like BRRRR deals. I was buying properties that needed renovation, going through and, in some cases, gut rehabbing them, which was an education in itself.
Yeah.
People don't realize, a lot of novice real estate investors don't realize that one of the hardest parts of investing in real estate is actually working with contractors.
Oh, yeah, absolute disaster.
Yeah. And I feel like most novices don't expect that. They think that the hard part is getting financing or funding. That is the easy part.
Yeah, they just assume contractors love to show up at the job on time and do a job complete to finish as fast as possible and really make sure to take care of the overhead, right?
Well, yeah, and people who are going out and putting 50 grand, 100 grand, on a down payment and closing costs and all of it, they tend to come from a professional background, right? And in the professional world, people tend to show up on time and they tend to do what they say they're going to do.
Or else you get fired.
Right, exactly. And contractors come from a very different world. It's a different mindset. It's a different cultural background. And, people who have only ever worked with other professionals, they're in for a rude awakening when they start working with contractors. And, that's not, I'm not trying to judge anyone in saying that, but that's just the practical reality of working with people who are from a different background than you. And you have to learn how to work with people from a different background. Working with contractors, I found to be one of the most difficult parts of active real estate investing.
Yeah, I still think it is. I mean, I've always used my own subs. I never let contractors use their own subs because you're going to just lose a bunch of money that way and get bad service. But yeah, I still think that it's a crapshoot every day, because the better that a contractor gets, the more business they get. And they're usually not that great at business. So they have too many jobs going at once, which means they're moving their crews around or getting temp crews, pickup crews. And then the quality of the work's not there. Nobody's supervising. I mean, this is like anybody who's a flipper is just nodding along because they're like, yeah, it's literally every job.
Yep. They know.
Unless you're James Daynard and you're just running, you have 5-6 crews of your own, it just doesn't work. So yeah, I think that's a really great point, and it's something to point out, because I really discourage people from being brand new flipper, especially now with the way that hard money rates are at. I mean, you can't be paying 15%, 2-3 points right now and hoping for the best, because it just won't. It's going to take 2 times as long and cost 2 times as much for sure if you're brand new. Just because you said you're going to trust the wrong people, there's going to be a lot of contractor walk away or slow down.
Yeah, it's a hard market for flipping homes, no question. With interest rates being this high and fewer buyers on the market, I mean, you have fewer sellers to compete with as well. But it's a tough market, no question. And the labor market is also super tight, which makes it that much harder to hire and manage contractors. So
Yes, I mean, when you were going through, how was the beginnings of landlording for you for the properties that you kept? Because a lot of people are like, "Oh, landlording sounds awesome," and then they get into it and I'm like, "This sucks."
I hated being a landlord.
Me too.
Totally hated it, which is why I'm not a landlord anymore. I got rid of all my rental properties and I invest passively today. That's another story, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Absolutely,
But to answer your question, one of the mistakes that I made as a young investor getting into this was I bought a lot of very low income rental properties, and that's
because they were cheap and they look like they cash flow well, right?
Yes, on paper they look great. They look like they cash flow perfectly.
Nothing looks better than a Class D property on paper.
Exactly. And there are a lot of hidden costs that just don't show up on paper. So things like high crime rates and people coming in and breaking apart your air conditioning condensers to rip out the copper, which happened to me many times.
Times. I've lost copper a lot.
High turnover rates. I mean, that's something that people don't really talk about enough for novice landlords or people just getting into this, is that landlords, they take their financial losses and their time losses, their headaches on turnovers. So the name of the game with landlording is to minimize your turnover rate, keep your tenants long-term, keep them happy, keep them paying rent on time, of course, draw boundaries and defend your lease. But to minimize those turnovers is really part of the game. It's a big part of the game for rental properties. You have higher turnover rates with lower end properties. And that's one of those things that, again, it doesn't show up easily on paper when you're doing a cash flow analysis, even when you're doing it right, better than I was doing it.
Yeah. And the rent that's on the MLS or that's proposed by whoever's, shoveling the property doesn't actually show it unless you see the bank accounts where the money's coming in. So the lease may be for $1,500. That doesn't mean that they've paid every month for the last 6 months.
Chasing down low income renters. It was, in some cases, it was every single month. People, they weren't going to pay unless you made them pay. I mean, you had to file in court for eviction basically every single month.
Yeah, right. You just have a standing eviction. Yeah,
which is a terrible way to run a rental business. I mean, it's no fun at all. It's absolutely miserable. It's expensive for you. It's a bunch of headaches. You're just constantly chasing people who don't want to pay and who don't care about their credit score anyway, right? I mean, lower end rental properties. It's an investing niche that you should leave to experts in that niche.
I completely agree. Whenever somebody says, "Hey, I want to start in Section 8 rentals," I said, "Look, that can be a really, really good business. Just probably not for you. You really want to get like 5 or 10 going at once and understand the ins and outs of that city before you really think that's going to be something that's going to be easy." Because it's just so much activity. If you try to do, I feel like if you just get a 2-family and that's like your side gig, you're going to be shocked that you just bought into another job. That's going to be like 20 hours of a week if it's not in great shape. I mean, these are important things for people to consider as they go in. I don't think either of us are discouraging. We both want people to take action, but it does seem easier than it is landlording just in general. Did you suffer from some of the fate that a lot of landlords do, is just picking the wrong tenants because whatever, I just want to get this puppy rented, especially at D class. You inherit a lot of tenants. That's always going to be difficult, or half and half. But sometimes you just, first renter, they're like, I'll pay, give you 3 months up front. You're like, sounds great. And you just take them.
Yeah. Absolutely. That happened to me many times. I had, I said a few minutes ago that, when you learn on the streets, you learn it the first time. That's not always true. It took me a few times to learn that lesson. I'm embarrassed to say. But I mean, so here's the other problem with these really low end properties is that, so like you alluded to, it's a lot more work, right? Per unit, per tenant. And the other thing is that it's not easy to find good property managers to take low end properties because they get paid as a percentage of the rent. So if you're a property manager who's actually good at your job and have the choice to choose who you want to work with, why would you ever take on these more difficult but lower paying jobs, basically?
More work for less. That's why they do scale their percentages up higher, and then it doesn't make sense on our end, and you need to have multiple units. That's a really good point, because it's important to people to understand the motivation of property managers. It's not, they're just being smart to not take one $500 rental on as a client. That's a terrible money for them. They're going to get the most calls from that property.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was something that I struggled with again and again, even after, I realized how much I hated landlording and how much I hated managing rentals, and how I kept putting bad tenants in there. I was like, oh, well, I'm just going to hire a property manager. And then I had to deal with the dregs of property managers, because no good property manager worth their salt would take these properties.
And realistically, though, you still have to manage the manager. So I don't think that I think people really think that when you hire property management, you're like, ooh, like, sweet, I'm passive. I mean, it's not passive. It's still not passive, because if you don't watch them, you're going to be losing all sorts of repair credits and everything. Tenants aren't going to be happy. It's just not that easy of a business to run. I like the idea of being a professional in any business, but, doing a 1 or 2 off, you really have to understand, don't buy 5 properties at once, or don't start with a 5 family. You won't know what you're doing landlording. And it's tough. A lot of people want a house hack now, and then their first tenant is their neighbor also. It's difficult to understand and figure out, like, how am I going to do this?
Oh, sure. Because you have to wear 2 different hats. You have 2 different relationships with them. And that can be a tricky road to navigate. I mean, I still do like house hacking as a first foray into rental investing. So for anyone who's kind of interested in dipping their toe in the water of rental investing, that can be a great way to knock out 2 birds with 1 stone, to eliminate your housing payment, ideally, and also to get some experience with, having a rental business. And it is a business, as we've been talking about. Yeah. You're taking on a real estate investing side hustle when you're buying rental properties. But you can do that in a low scale or a manageable way when it's just 1 or 2 units that are in your same building. So it's a good first foray for anyone who likes the idea of a real estate investing side hustle, and they're thinking about taking rental investing more seriously. Yeah. But it is a side hustle, and if you just want the benefits of real estate ownership, but you don't want a business around it, stick with passive real estate investing.
Yeah, and that's what we're about to get into. Hey, it's Jonathan, just taking a brief break from this episode to talk to you about Royal Legal Solutions. I had Scott Royal Smith on episode 92 of the podcast. You can go back and check that one out after you finish this episode. And he opened my eyes to how much protection I was losing every year that I didn't activate, build a team, and protect my assets. You can get information about Royal Legal Solutions by using my link at bit.ly/ZenRoyal. And bit.ly is bit.ly/ZenRoyal. You'll find a lot there. You'll find a 30-minute video to watch with Scott. And I can guarantee you what you hear on the podcast is exactly what you're going to hear in that video. So give it a try. I'm down the rabbit hole right with you. Let's get back to the show. We just did a very long segue into Spark Rental, because I love on the front of your site, it says without becoming a landlord. And this is really part of what you grew into. It's like, hey, this sucks. How can I create something that works a little better than this? So you give us a little info about Spark Rental, why you guys started it, and how it's become a fractional real estate investing model without all the headaches. But it's different than syndication.
Yeah. So Spark Rental, it's been a winding road. One of the things, just a high level observation about entrepreneurship in general, is that the business that you think you're in or that you think you're getting into is not necessarily the business that the market thinks you should be in and wants you to be in.
Yeah, yeah.
So, when my co-founder and I started Spark Rental back in 2016, our vision was to create an online property management software designed for mom and pop landlords, because at the time there wasn't really a good one. Today there are a few good options out there for.
I mean, good might be stretching it, Brian.
Well,
there are some options.
there are some options today.
Yeah.
There weren't really any good ones in 2016, so we had somewhat of a background in that. But we ran afoul because neither my partner nor I are technical founders. Neither one of us has a background in coding or website development, website design. So that quickly became a problem. And, so we're like, oh, we'll just hire this out to a web development company.
Yeah.
And then they took half of our seed capital and ran off with it. I mean,
sounds like a contractor.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, our original vision for the company, and by the way, we did eventually launch a software platform for mom and pop landlords. So go check that out.
Yeah.
if you are a landlord, a mom and pop landlord, and if you are interested in active real estate investing as a side hustle, we do have a lot of tools for you, including a bunch of free stuff like interactive maps and calculators and all that good stuff. The first and foremost being, by the way, a rental cash flow calculator. After all our talk earlier about how I messed that up so much, but what happened was in the course of putting together software for landlords to manage their properties, that took way longer than we expected it to. So, we launched a blog, we launched a podcast, we launched online courses, about real estate investing and building passive income and financial independence and all of these things that people get into real estate investing to do. And the question that our students and our audience members kept asking us over and over again was, hey, I've got a little bit of money to invest in real estate. I'm not quite ready to go out and buy my first property. Can I just invest with you guys in your next project? And I was living overseas at the time. I'm still living overseas. And my partner, who's later in her career, she's in her 60s now and no longer actively buying rental properties. Yeah. So we kept saying, no, we can't do that. And, after God knows how many dozens of times we heard that question, the light bulb went off. We're like, maybe we should actually consider this. Maybe the market is trying to tell us something. So, we sat down and we're like, all right, what would it look like to say yes to that? And so we started experimenting with that notion of co-investing. And our first foray into that was sitting down with an active investor. There's a guy in Michigan who we partnered with him on a couple deals, and we let in some of our core students on those investments with us. And those investments did fine. They did perfectly well financially, but it was way too much work. I mean, we weren't making any money off of these. Yeah. It was just a service for our students, a way to kind of learn while you earn and have some kind of hands-on exposure to buying properties. So, very quickly, within 2 properties, we were like, this is not sustainable. This is not a scalable model. But it was around that time that I had started investing passively in real estate syndications, and I'd kind of discovered that side of the business just personally. And so I went to my partner and I said, hey, buying individual properties, that is not scalable. But what if we tried doing some passive real estate investments and opening these up to our audience, to our core students as well? And she said, well, I don't know a ton about those, but, I'm happy to learn, so let's look into it. So we did a pilot deal. We bought into a syndication along with some of our audience members just to see how it would go. And, because as you know, syndications have a high minimum investment, typically 50 grand, 100 grand, sometimes even more, which is a big barrier to entry. So our model, the co-investing model we'd been using for individual properties and carried over to syndications is, all right, we'll just form a joint venture LLC and we'll each put in a minimum of $5,000, and collectively, we'll invest, 75 grand, 100 grand, 300 grand, whatever it is. Yeah. And it worked. It was our audience members loved it. Initially, it was just our core students, but then we said, well, could we open this up to the public? Does it have to just be our core students? So, we sat down with an attorney and had hashed out those conversations. And that was how our co-investing club in its current model was born. So today it is open to the public. It's a flat membership fee model. Every month we get together, we vet a new deal. Any club members who want to participate in that deal can do so with $5,000 or more. Collectively, we're investing, $150, $250, $350, whatever it is that month. But no one has to invest. It's purely, it's a peer-run club basically that's just administered by my partner and I. It's not a fund of funds. We get that question all the time. So you're a fund of funds. No, it is not a fund of funds. We don't get any cut of the money that is invested. We're not selling securities. We have no interest.
Co-investing.
It's co-investing. Yeah, it's an investment club. Kind of like your old school stock investment club where people would get together and sip brandy snifters or whatever, and they talk about stocks.
Yeah.
But instead of stocks, it's passive real estate investment.
Yeah, I really like it because there is syndications are, number one, are very complicated for people to understand, especially as a novice investor. Sure, everybody says, hey, it's passive investment, but there's a lot of due diligence that needs to be done. And they do a lot of due diligence, as you said, on you. Those values, I really don't see much going in lower than 50 grand on a syndication. So you do have to have substantial, or you need to be accredited in the first place. So it's hard to get in. This is an option that can help you get in there. And also, if you're someone who's maybe you have a decent amount of money, but you have 5 grand that you kind of just want to put into something and see what happens, and the stock market doesn't interest you, and you could do it alongside 10 people that you meet with all the time. So that, hey, we're all in this together, even if it's a little skin. I really like the idea. I think it provides a backdrop for people who are kind of caught in the middle. They don't have the time to do a flip or the money, and they don't want to risk it, out on an island by themselves.
Yeah. So you covered so many points there that that
I really liked it.
that I want to highlight. So the first point that you made that I want to highlight is you mentioned accredited investors. So part of our mission from the very beginning is inclusivity and serving all of our members, not just accredited investors. We have a lot of members who are accredited investors, but we also have a lot of members who are non-accredited who want access to these deals. And when you're a non-accredited investor and you're just entering this space, you really have 2 huge challenges. You have several, but one is that a lot of these investments are just not open to you at all, right? They only allow accredited investors. Another challenge is the ones that do allow non-accredited investors, by law, sponsors cannot advertise 506B syndications to the public. So if you're a non-accredited investor, and no one can, and how do you find them? Because no one can advertise them to you as a member of the public. So that's really hard as a non-accredited investor to even find any sponsors to who will take your money.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole money aspect itself. It's hard to come up with 50 grand, 100 grand to invest. Yeah. But even if you have the money, it's really hard to find, reputable, reliable sponsors who allow non-accredited investors because they can't advertise to you. So these are some of the hurdles that we are trying to solve for with our club. So every deal that we vet together as a club allows non-accredited investors. And our LLC that we form to invest through, that is itself a non-accredited investor because some of the members are non-accredited investors.
Right.
So that's one point that you raised that that I wanted to touch on because that is important to us. Our other guiding star core value is diversification. So we want to invest in a lot of different types of deals. So that's different types of properties, not just multifamily, but storage, retail, mobile home parks, industrial, you name it. We want to invest with a lot of different sponsors because you never know when a sponsor is going to go bad. I'll tell you, the 2 sponsors who we've had the worst experiences with were the 2 most reputable sponsors at the time that we invested with them. They were big name, very well-respected sponsors. Everyone just gushed about how great they were. And they ended up being the worst sponsors that we invested with. Whereas some of the smaller mom and pop sponsors, who, they weren't trying to create a big brand name for themselves. They were just kind of keeping their heads down and focusing on investing in real estate. They've been great. So diversification of sponsor matters. No matter how much due diligence you do on a sponsor, no how good their track record looks, sponsors with sparkling reputations can still go bad on you. So, so diversifying is one of the ways that we approach that. And when you can invest small amounts across a lot of different types of deals, a lot of different geographical markets, you can practice dollar cost averaging with your real estate investments. That's just not practical to do if you're investing 50 grand or 100 grand at a time. Yeah. So, I invest 5 grand every single month in all of these deals. I'm just in the trenches right there alongside of our members. And I can do that because it's 5 grand a month. I can't afford to invest 50 grand a month. Yeah, right. In a syndication.
Well, the return cycle is longer just for people who don't know. So you don't know, you may have an idea of when the expectation of a return is, but things may go haywire. You may need to hang out a little while. So, I just think now, not only are you giving, inclusion to a lot of people who don't have access, you're also giving basically like a buffet. You have a lot of options. You come to the table each week. Maybe one week you're just going to want to start with ice cream for no reason because it's a big buffet. That's the option, but you don't have to buy it. next month you'll get spare ribs or something, which are really solid. You might be more interested, but it really lets people participate. And I think if we all think back to our youth and like clubs, I mean, there's a lot of clubs now, they're more meetups, but in high school and junior high, for those of us who are nerdy like myself, clubs were cool. It's like because it's the only focused stuff where you can really focus on your true interests. Nobody wanted to have a history club because you had history class, but there's lots of things that you can work on. So for people to be able to meet up, vet an object and say, you know what, I really like the way this mobile home park, but I don't want to throw $5,000 in this month, and nobody makes them feel bad. That's really nice.
Yeah, and you touched on something there that was important and worth expanding on a little bit. And that's another type of diversification that I didn't get to earlier, but that's timeline, the diversification of the timeline of these investments. Because, as you said, it's a buffet and you have all these different options. All of our different members have different investment goals, right? I mean, some of them are more interested in income. Some of them are more interested in growth and maximizing profits. Some of them would rather have a short-term investment, 1 year, 2 years. Others don't care. They want those infinite returns where, they're just going to keep refinancing the property and keep returning capital, but might hold the property for 20 years, So that diversification of timeline is something that it's not enough investors talk about that. So we do take that seriously as another type of diversification when we're looking at deals and sponsors. We did a deal, I guess it was 2 months ago. It was a 1-year deal. It was a debt deal.
Oh, okay.
Flat interest for a single year on a piece of ranch land. It was very low risk. There was no development being done. They just bought a huge 500-acre ranch that very few people could afford to buy. And they're chopping it into a bunch of, 10, 20, 30, 40-acre ranches and selling them as is, basically. So there's no construction risk. There's no property management risk. They're just taking something and rezoning it, basically. But 1-year term on these, which is unusual. I mean, as you know, most syndications, you're looking at at least 3 years, more often 5, 6, 7 years. And you just don't know what the timeline is going to be on those deals. If it's a bad market for selling, maybe the sponsor just holds on to it for an extra couple of years.
Yeah.
So we do want to look for different timelines, knowing that a lot of our members have different priorities for investing. And a lot of them feel more comfortable with a shorter timeline. Some of them would rather park their money and leave it there forever, as long as it's paying strong returns. So that's an important part of diversification that not enough people talk about.
Yeah, I had a question based on the funds, because this maybe somebody's thinking like me. So you guys put you co-invest into a syndication. Some syndications, many have monthly outflow. So the monthly outflow comes back to the LLC. Do those people get paid out on those every month, or do most of them keep it like in the bucket for another investment?
Yeah, so for each deal, we set up a different LLC and open a joint LLC bank account. So it's not like that money can transfer between deals or between LLCs.
Yeah, okay. Well, so say whatever, you get $800 on a distribution for the month. Does that actually get divvied up between everybody in that month for the club, or do they keep it in there?
So what we do is every quarter, we send out everyone's portion of distributions.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So most of these deals pay quarterly. Some of them pay monthly, but even the ones that pay monthly, it's just too much work on the administrative side to split that up.
Send 12 people, $86.
Yeah, exactly. Here's your $20 from this month. So every quarter we go through and just send those out to each individual person.
Yeah, I was also thinking that it's kind of a good training plan for people who are interested in syndications, but they're not ready, or they don't want to dump $50,000 in just to watch and say like, okay, I only had $5,000 in, but I'm getting 8%. So this looks good. And then you can start to think of this, well, okay, what if I 10x this? I think that's a really good way of doing it without, I don't find most risky in general, because you're betting on operators. Of course, you could bet wrong on the operator, but it leverages them to a smaller amount, and then they can still see the return and just calculate it bigger if they wanted to.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of our members are accredited investors. They do have plenty of money to invest, but they don't want to, like you said, they don't want to start by shelling out $50,000, $100,000 in a syndication. They want to invest. So maybe the first deal they invest in with us, it's $5,000, and maybe the next one it's $10,000, and and they get a sense for how these work. They get a sense for how to analyze risk in these. That's one of the things that, so if people come to our club for the the small dollar investing limits, but they stay for the community.
Yeah.
And that's something that it doesn't fit in a tagline easily, right? But one of the huge advantages of a club like ours is we are vetting these together. So every month when we're getting together to vet a deal, 20, 30 different people are all trying to poke holes in the deal from different angles.
Yeah.
That's incredibly valuable, and people don't realize just how valuable that is until they actually attend one of these meetings and they're watching, so for example, we've got a woman in our club who is an insurance adjuster. So, the first thing that she does every time we sit down with a sponsor is she starts grilling them about their insurance premiums and, why didn't you estimate, more for insurance premium growth over the next few years? Like, don't you know what's going on in the industry?
Yeah.
And that's great. We love that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So we get all these different people who come from different backgrounds, different expertises, and who live in different geographical parts of the U.S. Many of them live in areas where we're investing. And that's happened many times where someone will raise their hand and say, hey, I live 5 minutes down the road from this property. I pass
Super helpful.
Yeah, it's really helpful.
Boots on the ground there.
They know the local market and can give us that insight, whereas I never would have gotten that, if I'm out there investing by myself. So that's the community element of it. And vetting all of these deals as a club, as a group, is really helpful. And it's hard to market that. Like I said, it doesn't fit into a neat tagline, but that is really where the ultimate value in our club comes from.
Yeah, it's just an interesting alternative model because I've always thought about, sure, I could create a syndication, but it seems like too much pressure for me. I'm like low pressure. I don't really want to be in this, but I've always, I've wanted to say to some people, hey, if you want to throw a teeny bit into my next flip, you can show up, once a month, I'll show you what to do. I like those mini JV deals, but this is a really interesting model that I think will be attractive to a lot of people who want to get their feet wet, want to get the community without the pressure of paying for a gigantic coaching program. They're not soaking in 20 grand just to put in more money later. And they can make a decision each month, is this an asset class that I'm interested in now, or maybe another one will come around?
Yeah. I love that you brought up pressure on this because that's one of the advantages that I see with putting small amounts every month in different deals. It's a much lower stress way to invest. So, if I put 100 grand into a syndication by myself and that deal doesn't do well, I'm lying awake at night, like chewing on my fingernails, right? That's a high stress way to invest. When you can put 5 grand at a time in these deals, you're not writing it off, of course. You're still gonna, be crying into your milk a little bit, if a deal goes south. But that's very different from putting 50 grand or 100 grand in a deal and having that deal go sideways on you. I've seen deals go sideways, and I as bummed as I was like, well, at least it was 5 grand.
The capital call is not that bad when you're at 5 and then they only need $100. It sounds pretty awesome.
Exactly. So it's a low stress way to invest. The way that I look at this is it's going to form a bell curve, the returns. So, inevitably, if you invest in 12 deals in a year, if you invest in one a month, like we do, or like I do, one or two of those deals is probably going to underperform in a given year.
Yeah.
One or two is going to hit it out of the park and really, blow your socks off with the returns. And then most of them are just going to be somewhere in the middle of the bell curve.
Yeah.
So, it's a low stress way to invest where you just tally up the average of your returns at the end of the year, and it's just numbers on a page at that point.
Yeah. Oh, so over the course of your career and now even with this getting these options every month, what's your favorite asset class personally?
Oh, okay.
The other ones won't call you later, like multifamily won't call you and say, Brian, I'm really disappointed with you that you chose self-storage.
All right. So I like mobile home parks. It's the ultimate affordable housing.
Yeah.
It's the only type of real estate where the supply is shrinking every year as opposed to growing. So I like that. City councils they're not approving new mobile home parks. It's not, they're not, as much as the lip service that they pay to affordable housing, they don't actually want mobile home parks in their jurisdictions.
Yeah.
They don't pay high property taxes. Some people consider them an eyesore or, it drags down the image of the community that they're trying to build.
Well, but meanwhile, though, you and I both know that some of the premier real estate in the country is still owned by mobile home parks. Malibu has one of the greatest mobile home parks ever where they're like $3 million. So they exist because they knew how to buy land in the beginning, either close to mountains, close to the views. They're smart.
So I'm sitting here in Lewis, Delaware right now, visiting my mother-in-law, and down the trail that I bike on every evening is a mobile home park that's 2 minutes from the beach.
Yeah.
And sits on this beautiful woodland biking trail. And I mean, the lots are worth way more than the houses that are on them.
Yeah.
So anyway, I like mobile home parks, and we've had good experiences with them. I'm somewhat bullish on light industrial. Multifamily is fine. I mean, it's sort of the bread and butter of real estate syndications. We look at a lot of those in the club, but we love other stuff as well.
Yeah, there's just so much multifamily that I think, learning, that's why, having a different asset, class generally each month, or at least breaking it up, can really help people learn, great. I mean, if I like the idea of apartments, I'm invested in apartment syndication, but I'm trusting the operator on that. But yeah, I've had a couple of great industrial and light industrial episodes. Very attractive asset class with a lot more scale right now than other things out there, because it's kind of, flexible.
Yeah. And, one thing that we talk about a lot that I think not enough people are talking about in this space is regulatory risk with residential properties. So other types of properties, you can get away from that regulatory risk. Some people will disagree with me on this, but now that eviction moratoriums are in the government's playbook, it'll happen again, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it may not happen for another 50 years, or it could happen next year. But the next time a big enough crisis comes along, it's in the government's playbook now. That precedent has been set. And, who knows what other regulatory emergency measures the government will take with residential properties. Other types of properties are at much lower risk for that. And even mobile home parks, if you have tenant-owned homes, you don't have the same regulatory risk as an operator.
Just own the pads, yeah.
That's right. So, I think not enough people take regulatory risk seriously. That's something that we look at whenever we're looking at a multifamily property. We look at, what are the state and local landlord-tenant regulations? How tenant-friendly are they? That adds to the risk in that deal.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that we're not willing to ever invest in tenant-friendly jurisdictions, but it's a risk factor that we consider, and there have to be mitigating factors for us to consider that.
Yeah, and I think that's even more important the larger scale the deal is. I find people a little bit wringing their hands too much over landlord-tenant laws when they're just buying one single family. It's like, just pick a good tenant. You're not going to have to evict them. I mean, sure, could there be something crazy? Yes, but generally, large units, especially if you have bad financials and you're getting a good deal, means a lot of evictions. So you do want to make sure at least the process can be as smooth as possible. Yeah, I mean, those are good. I mean, I think, again, it's interesting for people to be able to get a diverse kind of education on assets and pop up with things that they didn't even know, were a possibility, or think like other people like, hey, mobile home parks, how could that make money? Well, let me explain it to you. Most things in real estate make money. There's lots of different ways. You just have to understand, the asset class as well as possible.
Yeah, and not to dig too deep into mobile home parks here. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole. But one of the nice things about mobile home parks and affordable housing in general is that they're recession resilient. Because in the event of a recession, what do people do? A lot of people will downgrade their housing. And again, mobile home parks are the ultimate affordable housing. We've also invested in a couple other affordable housing deals where there's some other angle to it or some other component to it. So for example, last month we invested in a property where the sponsor partnered with the local municipality, with the local housing authority, to set aside half of the units for affordable housing in exchange for a 50% property tax abatement indefinitely. So, there are you get an initial bump in returns, effective returns, just from that alone before you even get into any renovations, right, or any of the value add stuff. So, there are a lot of ways that you can approach affordable housing. There's another sponsor who we invested in earlier this year. They do, I think it's called the Section 8 overhang strategy, where they go in and they buy a LIHTC property And then they take advantage of a loophole in those rules where they put in Section 8 tenants who can pay the full market value rents. But because the tenant's portion still falls under the limits for LIHTC, they still get all the benefits from LIHTC as well. So there are a lot of these niche strategies you can use to reduce your risk, especially the risk of a recession, knocking out your occupancy rates and your rents. Yeah, there are a lot of ways that you can approach that with affordable housing, but there has to be some extra strategy in place rather than just going in and saying, I'm buying cheap properties, like we talked about earlier in our conversation.
Yeah. I mean, recession proof, I always think of self-storage also, because people are, whenever you think downsizing, they still have too much stuff. No one wants to get rid of all of our kids, drawings from first grade, even though they're terrible and they're never going to look at them again. Better keep like 26 boxes full of them. I have them all in my basement. So
there you go.
I'm as much to blame. Awesome. Brian, is the best place for people to find out more at sparkrental.com?
Yeah, come check out sparkrental.com. You'll see our co-investing club front and center there. You'll see all the details about it. Again, it's a flat fee club. So, it's not like we're getting a cut of any of the money invested. You can see the pricing right there. It's $59 a month or $497 a year. Or shoot me an email, brian@sparkrental.com. You can check us out on all the social platforms as well. We have a big Facebook group for active investors. There's, 48,000, 49,000 active investors in there. We've got another one for passive investors that's, 8,000 or 9,000 members at this point. They're both very active groups. So anyway, connect whatever is the most comfortable for you, and hope to see you in an upcoming club meeting.
Yeah, and it's your podcast is Living Off Rents, right? Did I make that up, or is that correct?
Live Off Rents? Okay. Live Off Rents by Spark Rental.
I knew I was in there.
Is the name of our podcast? Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, I'm glad we did the trade-off, and it was a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for taking time on your vacation to swing in, get this recorded in the library. I really appreciate it.
Jonathan, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I appreciate it. All right. That was Brian Davis, the co-founder of Spark Rental. I'm Jonathan Green. We'll see you next episode. Thanks so much for sticking around after that episode with Brian Davis. I hope you enjoyed it. And now we're giving previews of the next episode at the end of the previous episode. So you don't have to hear the same thing at the end every week. You can stick with it and hear a preview of next week. Next week, my guest is Paul Thompson. He's the CEO of a commercial real estate coaching company called Real Estate 101. This guy has done it all. 40 single-family rentals, GP in a little over 1,000 units, LP in over 2,000 units, a fund with 10 million active under management, and several land development projects. We talk a lot about real estate investing. We also talk about mindset. We talk about the market. Stay tuned next week for episode 160 with Paul Thompson, and thanks so much for listening.